Don't look away from what I'm about to tell you, because I almost looked away myself. And if I had, my wife would be dead. My name is not important right now. What's important is that I am 64 years old. I've been married to the same woman for 39 years, and I nearly lost her to someone who sat at my dinner table and called me Dad. My wife's name is Marlene. She taught second grade at Riverside Elementary in Columbus, Ohio for 32 years. 32 years. She knew every child's name in the building, remembered their siblings, their dogs, their allergies. She brought home little drawings they made for her and kept them in a box under the bed. She used to say the job would kill her eventually. All that chalk dust and cafeteria noise. But she said it laughing, the way people do when they love something so much they can't imagine it ending. I met Marlene when we were both 25. She was at a cookout on a cousin's back porch in Dayton, wearing a yellow sundress and arguing with somebody's uncle about whether Stevie Wonder peaked in the 70s. I walked over just to hear her talk. I never really stopped listening. We had one son. His name is Curtis. He grew up quiet and thoughtful. The kind of boy who read instruction manuals for fun and fixed things around the house before you even noticed they were broken. We were proud of him in that way that goes deep and doesn't need to be said out loud. He became a civil engineer, married at 31, brought her home to meet us on a Sunday in October. Her name was Adrian. She was 29, worked in pharmaceutical sales, drove a white Audi, and had the kind of smile that arrived before the rest of her face. Curtis looked at her the way I used to look at Marlene when we were young, so I was happy for him. I pushed down whatever small, quiet unease I felt, and I was happy for my son. That unease never had a name back then. It was just a temperature, a degree or two off in a room that looked perfectly warm. They married 14 months after they met. We hosted the rehearsal dinner at our house. Marlene cooked for 2 days straight. Peach cobbler, macaroni and cheese, smothered chicken, the whole spread. Adrian stood in the kitchen watching her and smiling and saying how she'd always wanted to learn to cook like that. Marlene offered to teach her. Adrian never took her up on it. They bought a house 20 minutes from us in Westerville. Close enough to visit easy. We saw them most Sundays. Marlene and I would drive over, or they'd come to us and we'd eat and watch football and talk about nothing important. That was good. That was the life I'd worked for. Then Marlene started getting tired. It started small enough that I almost missed it. She'd fall asleep on the couch before the second half of the game. She'd say her legs felt heavy going up the stairs. She stopped taking her morning walk, the one she'd done every day for 15 years. Rain or shine, all the way to the end of Fairview Drive and back. I thought it was the end of the school year wearing on her. She'd had a difficult class that spring, but the school year ended and she didn't bounce back. By August, she was losing weight. She wasn't trying to lose. By September, she was having dizzy spells. By October, 2 months before their first wedding anniversary, Marlene was sitting in the office of Dr. Teen Patterson at the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, getting blood drawn for the third time in 6 weeks. The first round of tests came back inconclusive. The second round pointed toward some kind of autoimmune response, but nothing definitive. Dr. Timebance. Patterson referred her to a rheumatologist. The rheumatologist ordered more tests. Meanwhile, my wife was getting thinner and quieter and more fragile in a way that had no bottom to it. I would lie awake at night and listen to her breathing and feel something I hadn't felt since my father was sick, that particular helplessness, the kind where you are present and competent in every other area of your life and completely useless in the one that matters. Curtis was attentive. He called every few days, came by on weekends. Adrian came with him. She would sit with Marlene on the couch and rub her hands and ask her questions. She always brought something: soup from a deli, flowers, once a whole basket of herbal teas she said were good for inflammation. She found the teas at a specialty store in Clintonville, she told us. High quality, not the stuff from the grocery shelf. Marlene drank them every day. I didn't think about the teas. I want to be honest about that. I didn't think about them at all. November came and Marlene was admitted to the hospital for a 4-day observation stay. Her blood pressure had dropped twice in 1 week. She was having tremors in her hands. The neurologist on call ordered a full workup. It was on the second day of that stay that a woman named Bev walked into the room. She wasn't Marlene's assigned nurse. She was the charge nurse on the floor, the one who manages the whole unit, coordinates everything, deals with the complicated situations. She was probably 50-something, compact and efficient, moved through that hallway like she'd memorized every inch of it. She'd been on that unit for over 20 years, I later found out. She came in to check something on the monitor, and I was sitting in the chair by the window reading a 3-month-old copy of Sports Illustrated, because that's what you do when your wife is in a hospital bed and you don't know what else to do with your hands. Marlene was asleep. Bev looked at the chart. Then she looked at Marlene. Then she looked at the chart again. She said without looking at me, "Has anyone in your family recently given her any supplements or herbal products?" I said yes. My daughter-in-law had brought some herbal teas a few months ago. Marlene had been drinking them since. Bev didn't say anything for a moment, then she walked out. She came back 45 minutes later. She asked if I could step into the hallway. I followed her to a small alcove near the supply room, the kind of pocket of space that exists in hospitals for conversations they don't want anyone overhearing. She said, "I'm not supposed to say this to you yet. The attending hasn't been briefed, but I have been a nurse for 23 years, and I have seen this blood work pattern twice before. Once in a case that went to trial." She paused. "Someone needs to look at those T's." I said, "What are you saying to me?" She said, "I'm saying that the symptoms your wife is presenting, the peripheral neuropathy, the hair loss, the GI distress, the tremors, they are consistent with chronic low-dose heavy metal toxicity. I'm saying that the metabolic panel from this morning is asking questions I can't answer with the diagnoses currently on her chart." She looked at me steadily. "I'm saying you need to bring in those T's today." I drove home in 22 minutes. I don't remember most of the drive. The teas were in the cabinet above the coffee maker in a small wooden box Adrian had given us, 8 different kinds all labeled in a careful hand, the kind of labels you make yourself. I brought all of them. I also brought the mug Marlene used. I brought the small strainer she used to steep them. I didn't call Curtis on the way back to the hospital. I don't know exactly why. Some instinct told me to wait, to know something before I said anything. Bev was waiting. She took the box and the mug and the strainer and said she was going to have them sent to the lab through a specific pathway, not the standard one. She said this will take time, a few days, maybe more. In the meantime, no more tea, no more supplements, nothing that didn't come from this hospital's pharmacy. I said, "Do you think my daughter-in-law did this?" She said, "I think your wife is very sick in a way that doesn't match any of the explanations we currently have. I think the timing is worth examining. That's all I'm prepared to say right now." That night I sat in the chair next to Marlene's bed, and I held her hand while she slept, and I thought about things I didn't want to think about. I thought about the teas arriving right around the time her symptoms started. I thought about Adrian's job, pharmaceutical sales, and what a person in that field might know about compounds and dosages. I thought about a conversation I'd overheard 6 months earlier. Curtis and Adrian in the kitchen of their house in Westerville. Adrian saying something about money in a tight voice. Curtis saying they'd figure it out. Adrian saying that was easy for him to say. I thought about the life insurance policy we'd taken out on Marlene 2 years ago, the one Curtis knew about because I'd told him the way fathers do, wanting to be transparent about the family's finances. I thought about how Adrian always offered to make the tea when she was at our house. I didn't sleep. The results came back in 6 days. 6 of the longest days of my life. During that time, I behaved normally. I ate with Curtis in the hospital cafeteria. I talked with Adrian on the phone when she called to check in. I said Marlene was holding steady. I asked about their weekend. I said thank you when she said she was praying for us. On the morning of the 6th day, Bev called me to a conference room on the 4th floor. There was a man with her I hadn't met before, a heavy-set man in his late 50s, calm eyes, wearing a gray sport coat. His name was Detective Alonzo Webb, from the Columbus Police Department's Major Crimes Unit. He introduced himself quietly, without ceremony. He slid a folder across the table toward me. He said the samples from the tea and the mud tested positive for thallium sulfate. He let that sit for a moment. Thallium is a heavy metal. It was historically used in rat poison before regulations restricted it. It's odorless, tasteless, and dissolves readily in water. In low, repeated doses, it produces exactly the symptom profile your wife has been experiencing. He looked at me with those calm eyes. The concentration in the loose-leaf tea was significantly elevated, consistent with intentional addition, not contamination. I heard the words. I understood the words. But there was a part of me that just kept waiting for the sentence that would make it not true. He said, "Mr. Mitchell, The evidence suggests your wife has been receiving small doses of thallium over a period of approximately 8 to 10 months. 8 to 10 months. I thought about every Sunday dinner, every cup of tea, every time Adrian sat on the couch holding Marlene's hands and asking how she was feeling. I said, "What do we do now?" Detective Webb said, "We'd like your help." What they needed from me was time. They needed to build the chain of evidence in a way that would hold up in court. They had the contaminated teas, but they needed to establish where the thallium came from and how it got into the packaging. They had begun looking into Adrian's purchasing history, her professional contacts, her access to restricted compounds through her sales work. They asked me not to confront her. They asked me not to tell Curtis yet. Not because they suspected him, but because they needed his genuine reaction to be genuine. They asked me to continue acting normally for as long as I could stand it. I want to tell you that was easy. It was not easy. 2 weeks later, Curtis and Adrian came to the hospital on a Sunday afternoon. Marlene was improving. The tremors had reduced. The dizziness was less frequent now that the exposure had stopped. The doctors were saying carefully optimistic things. Adrian walked in with a white paper bag from a bakery Curtis liked, set it on the bedside table, leaned over, and kissed my wife on the cheek. I watched her do it, and I kept my face completely still, and I have never worked harder at anything in my life. Detective Webb called me that evening. He said they had what they needed. He said it would happen in the morning. Adrian was arrested at 6:47 a.m. at her house in Westerville. Curtis called me 40 minutes later, barely able to form a sentence. I drove to him. I sat with my son at his kitchen table while he tried to understand something that I had spent 3 weeks trying to understand myself. And I will tell you right now, there is no understanding it. You can get to the facts. You can get to the motive. The detective explained it all to us, the debt, the policy amount, the research she had done on thallium's detectability in standard tox screens, the contacts she had made through a former colleague with access to industrial-grade compounds. You can know all of that and still not be able to hold it in your mind as something a real person actually did. The debt was substantial, more than Curtis knew, more than $200,000, accumulated over several years through private loans she'd taken out without telling him. A failed business venture she'd kept hidden, credit accounts he'd never seen. She had done the math on a life insurance policy, $500,000, and she had decided that Marlene's life was a financial problem with a solution. That is the sentence I have to live with, knowing that my wife, who taught second graders how to read, who kept their drawings in a box under the bed, was a financial problem with a solution. Curtis filed for divorce before the trial. He sat in the courtroom every day. He never spoke to her directly. He didn't need to. Adrian pled guilty to attempted murder in the first degree to avoid trial. She was sentenced to 22 years in the Ohio Correctional Institution for Women. She will be eligible for parole in 2041. My wife will be 83 years old in 2041. My wife will be 83 years old in 2041. Marlene came home from the hospital 6 weeks after that conversation in the hallway with Bev. She walked through our front door on a Wednesday afternoon in January, and I had cleaned the whole house and made a pot of her mother's chicken soup from memory. And she sat down at the kitchen table and looked around the room, and she cried a little. She didn't know the full story yet. I told her slowly over several weeks. She took it the way Marlene takes hard things, quietly, then deeply, then with a kind of steadiness that I have always found remarkable and that I will never take for granted again. She still doesn't drink tea. Maybe she never will. I don't push it. Curtis comes over most Sundays. Just him now. He sits in the same chair he sat in his whole childhood, at the same table, and we eat and we talk. Sometimes the conversation is easy and sometimes it is not, but he comes. Every week he comes, and I think that is its own kind of courage. I'm telling you this story because I think about the version where I didn't follow my instinct that night, where I looked at the chart and didn't say anything, where Bev walked out and decided it wasn't her place, where I dismissed the unease I felt from the very beginning as something unfair and uncharitable, the way we're taught to dismiss things we can't prove. I think about how close we came. If you are sitting here tonight watching this and something in your gut has been speaking to you about someone in your family, about something that doesn't add up, about a pattern you've been trying to talk yourself out of noticing, I am not telling you to accuse anyone. I am not telling you to be afraid. I am telling you to pay attention, to not silence the part of yourself that notices. Bev paid attention. She did not silence herself. She pulled me into a hallway alcove and she said the thing she wasn't supposed to say yet, because she had been a nurse for 23 years and she knew what she was looking at. My wife is alive because a stranger trusted what she knew. I think about that every single morning when I hear Marlene moving around in the kitchen. The particular sound of her opening the cabinet. The way she hums a little when she doesn't know I'm listening. Small things, the kind you spend a whole life taking for granted, right up until the moment you almost lose them. I don't take them for granted anymore. I keep coming back to a word Bev used that day in the hallway. She said the timing was worth examining. Not the guilt, not the motive, not the sentence, just the timing. That one quiet word from a woman who had been paying attention for 23 years, who had seen enough to know what she was looking at and had the courage to say it out loud even when she wasn't supposed to yet. That's what saved Marlene. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a lucky break, just a person who had built the kind of knowledge that comes from decades of showing up and who chose to act on it instead of staying quiet. I think about that a lot now. The gap between knowing something and doing something about it. Adrian knew what thallium did to a human body. She'd done the research. She understood the dosage. She knew it wouldn't show up on a standard screen. That's a certain kind of intelligence turned completely backwards. Knowing without conscience isn't wisdom. It's just capability in the hands of someone who traded their integrity for a number on a piece of paper. And the number wasn't even real. The debt she was hiding. The loans Curtis didn't know about. The failed business she'd kept secret. All of it was the result of choices she'd made and then refused to face honestly. There's a straight line from that first decision to hide something from her husband to the last decision to put poison in an old woman's tea. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in increments, each one a little worse than the last, each one made easier by the one before it. That's how people end up somewhere they never imagined they would be. Not in one leap. In small steps taken in the wrong direction, consistently, over time. Curtis is the part of this story I think about the most. He sat in that courtroom every day. He didn't make speeches, didn't perform anything for anyone. He just showed up, and he stayed present, and he let the truth be what it was. There is something in that I find hard to put into words exactly, the way he carried something unbearable without letting it make him someone different. He still comes for Sunday dinners. He still asks about his mother's health like it matters because it does. That's not nothing. That takes more than most people know. What I want to say to you, if you take anything from this at all, is that the three things that moved this story towards something survivable were not complicated. Bev had the wisdom to recognize what she was seeing and the moral backbone to speak up about it. Curtis had the strength to keep going through something that would have broken other people. And Marlene just kept being herself. Honest, present, worth saving. None of us are immune to the kind of betrayal that happened in this family. It doesn't announce itself. It comes in a wooden box with hand-labeled T's and a smile that arrives before the rest of the face. The only protection any of us really has is the thing Bev modeled in that hallway. Pay attention, trust what you know, and don't silence yourself when it counts. The rest has to work itself out, and sometimes slowly it does.